This is Bruce the Boss, and I firmly stand behind and support, or should I say stand with, Joe Rogan. And unlike Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's punk behind, I am not wavering on that decision, cowering back, or apologizing to the mob for wanting to stand up for freedom of speech, freedom of discussion, freedom to think. And that's what this is really about. The attacks on Joe Rogan, which are really starting to escalate, are coordinated attacks, political attacks to suppress anyone who does not fall in line 100% with the worldview of the right side. This recent attack, which we'll get into a little bit later, was started by a group known on Twitter as Patriot Takes. Patriot Takes, which is taking credit for the dissemination of the most recent controversy, are partners with MeidasTouch, which is a Democratic Super PAC. Again, keep that in mind. A Democratic Super PAC is in partner with and or in league with the group that is claiming responsibility for Joe Rogan's most recent controversy. This is a coordinated effort at the highest level, which first sought to try to discredit him by falsely claiming that he was taking horse dewormer. When that didn't work, now they're attacking him based upon so-called racist epithets. I wouldn't be surprised if next a rape or sexual assault victim tries to come out against him. But I digress. What this is an attack, again, on free speech. Because ever since the start of this pandemic, we have seen a coordinated effort by those in power to do nothing but try to control the narrative, control the conversation, control what you're able to hear, see, read, and by extension, control what you think and what you know. Because if the only thing you see, hear, and read is what they allow you to hear, see, and read, that's going to shape your perception of reality and what you think is true and what you do or don't know. We saw this coordinated effort with the government, mainstream media, and social media by, for one, only putting out a narrative, a singular narrative, while not having any conversations or bringing anyone on to discuss anything contrary to said narrative. And if you dare disagree with the narrative, I remember Facebook, again, and I've said this before in previous videos, they dare try to make this joking meme, who are you going to listen to, your high school friend or the medical experts, not realizing that a lot of these people who were questioning the narrative were actually listening to all of the research that was available, not just what was being plugged in front of you on your network and or cable television TV series, but rather all of the research and data available that didn't exactly support what you were hearing on TV and on the news. And then when actual practicing medical doctors, not these theorists working in the lab and or just looking at studies, but actual practicing physicians, those who are out there in the field practicing their craft, came out back in July of 2020 in the famous White Coat Summit and delivered their testimony in front of, I believe, Congress, and then gave a short press conference outside of the steps of the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken. Only for one instance, one media outlet covered that press conference, and when video of that press conference circulated across the social media and internet, the largest the largest social media providers, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, all in a coordinated effort within 12 to 14 hours after the video first appeared and started circulating, removed it entirely. They decided that these medical experts, practicing doctors, were not allowed a voice that contradicted the narrative that they wanted to put out. Again, this was a coordinated effort. And again, how do you get a consensus in science? For one, there's hardly ever a consensus in science. There's always debate. There's always challenging of theories, ideas, observation, practices, and debate, and that active debate within science. But how do you get the quote unquote consensus that they currently have? Is, again, you have nothing but the medical professionals that will divulge the story that you want them, or the angle or the data that you want them to portray to support the narrative that you're trying to put out there, whether that's to be in line with the Agenda 2030 and global reset, that their agenda that they're trying to push. They only allow medical experts and or scientists that will push that agenda and or facts and or data that will lead to that consensus, all the while persecuting those medical professionals and or scientists that dare come out with contradicting data, contradicting facts, evidence, and or their own expert medical opinion. We've seen them come after those professionals, those doctors, by either firing them from their practice, sparking investigations, which will potentially lead to, if successful, if the persecution that is successful, decertify them from their medical certification, and or remove and or take away their medical licenses. We've seen that persecution come out, which will either lead to one of two consequences. Either the doctors and the medical professionals will take up that cross, and in order to let the truth be out there, they'll take it, like Dr. Jensen has been willing to do up there in Minnesota, or they're just going to comply and go with the flow. Why rock the boat? Why risk your practice? Why risk your income when you can just go with the narrative, especially if it pays out for you? Because even though the jabs are free to you, the individual consumers, no matter what country you're in, apparently it's being covered by your government, even though your government paid billions in your tax dollars to these pharmaceutical companies to order these. But the doctors are getting reimbursed for these and just administering these jabs, and they're getting paid millions over the course of several different patients, several different jabs. So there's also a financial incentive for your own private medical doctor to encourage the jab. Keep that in mind. But again, we've seen them come after medical professionals, and they've done their best to try to control the narrative, especially with the coordinated efforts of social media being on their side. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all removing and or flagging any content, even if it comes from practicing medical doctors and or scientists of decades worth of experience. They are censoring that information. And unfortunately, even some of the most prominent YouTubers, for instance, whether it be Tim Pool and or Kim Iverson, though individual and or collectively, with Kim now being on The Hills Rising, they receive more views on that platform than mainstream, at least some of the mainstream media outlets like the collapsing CNN, MSNBC, not as much as NBC, ABC, or CBS, due to the fact that practically everyone who has TV has at least local broadcasting, and they're going to be mostly watching those. But they're getting more views than the CNNs and MSNBCs easily, and the Young Turks. Despite that larger platform, and even Steven Crowder, they're forced to self-censor on YouTube. There's things that they're just not allowed to say to further challenge or collapse the narrative. So they're forced to self-censor. Yes, they'll have their own self-owned content on their own websites. I know Tim Pool has his member content only site that he recently got up and running. I know Steven Crowder has his own successful podcast and website with the Mug Club. Kim Iverson is forced to go on to Locals and the Rumbles to put out her content that challenges the narrative that she's not allowed to put on YouTube. But those particular sites don't get nearly as much traffic as the YouTube platform. So they've been successful in trying to censor any prominent alternative voices and forcing a lot of people who are doing their own research to go to those other outfits, but it's just not in the same numbers. Now, here's where Joe Rogan becomes the problem and why they're going after him so hard. Joe Rogan made the smart move of leaving YouTube exclusively for the Joe Rogan Experience to sign a $100 million deal with Spotify. Now, Spotify has been backing him, luckily. He's been having real conversations with basically any and everyone, celebrities, scientists, authors, medical doctors, technicians, what have you, athletes, performers, entertainers. He'll have real conversations with everyone. But most importantly, what makes him dangerous is that he'll not only have conversations with everyone, that also includes the medical professionals and their scientists that have credentials up the woo-ha, whether it's Dr. Peter McCullough and or Dr. Robert Malone, who just those two alone have far more credentials than any and all medical correspondents on the MSNBCs, NBCs, ABCs, CBSs, and CNNs, and even Fox News for that matter. And yes, that is mostly including that fascist CNN contributor Lena Wen, or Dr. Lena Wen, I'm sorry. You're talking about very credentialed individuals that go against the narrative, and they can't control him. Spotify has so far refused to censor him, unlike what YouTube would have done, and Twitter and Facebook or Metaverse are actively doing. Spotify is backing his freedom of speech and freedom of conversation. And what's worse is that Joe Rogan alone gets tens of millions of downloads of each of his podcasts. Each of his podcasts is getting tens of millions of downloads and views. The Peter McCullough and Dr. Robert Malone being the biggest of them all, getting upwards to 40 million downloads and views within the first week or so. And that is more viewership, more of a bigger audience and platform than all of the media combined. The CNNs, the Fox News, MSNBCs, NBCs, ABCs, even, again, Fox News' own Tucker Carlson, he is probably one of the lone individuals on that network going against the grain, because even Fox News is complicit with the singular narrative. But and Tucker Carlson, I believe, is the highest rated cable news or cable entertainment program on TV right now, or at least on cable TV. Joe Rogan's still blowing him out of the water, even if you throw his numbers, Tucker Carlson's, in with everyone else. Joe Rogan has the biggest audience, the largest number of ears tuned into what he has to say, the conversations he's having, and they can't control him, and that freaks him out tremendously, because it's helping to collapse the narrative and wake people up. So they're doing everything they can, everything in their power to destroy him. The first wave was try to discredit him and falsely claim he took horse dewormer, even though he came out and said what he believed to be actually the magic bullet in the cocktail that he was prescribed by his doctor, mind you. This wasn't just him coming up with something. His doctor prescribed him a list of medications. One of those was the I word, which I am not even really allowed to say on the YouTube. But the other one, I believe I am allowed to say, monoclonal antibodies. He clearly said that was the magic bullet right there. But they focused on the other drug, the I word, and lied about that. Lied about what it was. Despite the fact that there's a big difference between the human formulation, which won a Nobel Peace Prize back in 2015, and the horse formulation, which you can get from any farm and or pet store. Well, maybe not any pet store, but at least any farm-related store, versus one where you can only get a prescription from and get from a pharmacy after the pharmacist. So when they couldn't get him on what he took in terms of medication and discredit him, especially after he had CNN's own Sanjay Gupta on and got him to admit that his company, CNN, was flat wrong with how they were framing the medication, he called them out on it. They had a pie on their face, egg on their face, whatever you want, whatever terminology you want to use. Now, this is the next effort. The next effort was to try to even further cancel him by falsely putting the label of misinformation in his content, despite the fact that, like I mentioned before, he had some of the most credentialed individuals come on his podcast, and he's had a lot of other people who disagreed with him and or the narrative, like Josh Schweppes, if I'm pronouncing his name right, who actively disagreed with him. Joe Rogan had no qualms with changing his opinion and or facts on a particular topic like myocarditis right there live on the show, doing the research. If someone challenged him, he has no qualms with having people who have different views on challenging him, fact checking that information in real time, and then adjusting his position and or opinion. So he's had a lot of different people, but he's had some of the most credentialed individuals on his show talking science and facts regarding mRNA and all that stuff about the jabs and or what's going on right now. And instead of being able to have a debate with him or even asking to have a debate, they're just trying to silence him. Silence the conversation, silence the discussion. Problem is, Spotify backed them up and said, no, we're not going to do anything like that at first. Then you had has-beens like Neil Young and India Arie try to come out and say, you know what, it's either going to be him or me. And Spotify said, all right, peace. You don't want to be on here? Fine. We need him more than you, because he's pulling in the views that you could only dream of. In fact, a lot of these individuals, and much love to India Arie, I do love that one song, Ready for Love, which, by the way, I only knew of and heard because it was played on a clip of Dawson's Creek episode. I forget the episode of season 5. Jen was breaking up with Dawson, and I thought the song was perfect for how it came out in that particular scene. It fit perfectly. It sucks that you can't hear it on the current streaming or DVD versions of the same episodes, because I guess they didn't get the licensing for it. But beautiful song, still one of my 100 favorite to listen to. Beautiful voice, but let's be real, you're deciding to not be on Spotify anymore has been the biggest wave of news that you've made, period, in the last 7, 8, maybe even 10 years. Your relevancy isn't enough to really sway Spotify or anyone else for that matter. So now getting into the most recent controversy, and that is the use of what they claim to be a racial epithet that, again, through the Democratic Super PAC MeidasTouch, using Patriot Takes as their Trojan horse, so to speak. They are now trying to claim Joe Rogan to be some kind of a racist because of his use of the word nigga, which I do apologize for anyone watching this who is offended, but I find it funny that someone like myself can say that word without impunity, regardless of the context, intent behind it. It could be as malicious as possible or a sign of camaraderie. And I can say that almost anywhere outside of a church, and no one will look sideways or otherwise. But then someone else, and I find it interesting too how a lot of Latinos have been able to use the word in the music industry. No one says a word. I mean, I think Jennifer Lopez is the only person who's ever got any criticism with her song I'm Real that she did with Ja Rule, which, by the way, Ja Rule's the one that wrote those lyrics for her. But then Big Pun, Fat Joe, and Mortal Technique, all Latinos, can say the word repeatedly in their music. No one bats an eye. But other than that, I just find that the hypocrisy around the word is very interesting. And keep in mind, those were quick clips taken out of context of a larger conversation that Joe Rogan was having. He wasn't saying it in a racial manner. Rather, he was having a broader conversation about the word, but instead of cowering like most other Caucasians would in that situation and talking about the word in a broader context, but instead saying N-word, he just said the word nigga. He just said, why not I just say it? It wasn't said as a racial slur. He was just using the word in the context of a bigger conversation. He wasn't being racist about it. And with that said, how can you be hypocritical about its usage regardless of the shade? Because, for instance, we hear it all the time in the entertainment world, whether it be black comedians saying it in front of a white audience, getting nothing but cheer, and or musicians who are selling it out in their music and lyric after lyric after lyric, and or not just in the lyrics, but even in the song title in and of itself, and knowingly selling it to a white audience. Because we all know whenever an artist, particularly a hip-hop artist, goes platinum, after a certain small percentage of those sales crosses a certain number or threshold, you know it's all white audiences after that buying your music. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it's a fact that 70 to 75% of all record sales are that in hip hop, being specific, 70 to 75% of all hip hop sales are that of white audiences. So you know who the product is for, who you're getting it out to. How can you be then upset really when they then just spit the same product that you're giving to them back at you? Because you know who's getting pimped. You know, and I find the hypocrisy in it. In fact, there was one star, I forget her name, who was doing a TikTok video or whatnot, singing along to a Fuji song. And when it came to Lauryn Hill's verse, she's just singing along to the song. And when the word nigga came up in the lyrics, she's just singing along to the song. Nothing else, no pre-thought or anything behind it other than just singing along. And she got crucified. And yet when Jay-Z, performing one of his biggest singles, which, by the way, the name is Nigga What, Nigga Who, although for the radio content and MTV video, they changed it to Jigga What, Jigga Who, but he does the concert here.
I'm gonna take this side. Everybody this side. Y'all say nigga what? Y'all say nigga who? 1, 2, 3. Fuck with me. Take to the sea. Fuck with me. Take to the sea. Fuck Motherfucker wanna act loco, hit him up, numerous shots with the popo. Back wanna talk the popo, stroke him like.
And is demanding the audience sing along to the chorus, which by its very nature, the chorus is. And no one bats an eye. There's no problem with it. In fact, I'm even old enough to remember DMX doing a Woodstock concert in 1999, shown on MTV. And as he's performing his song, I believe it was the Rough Rider anthem, a sea of over 300,000 individuals, which I believe it's safe to say, especially when you look at the pan view, 99.95% of that crowd was Caucasian. We're singing along word for word, so much so that when you listen to the performance, at some point during the verse, not the chorus, but the verse, DMX stops and allows the crowd to, and you can hear the crowd singing along to the song without missing a beat, or a word. DMX intentionally stopped. He didn't even do this. He just stopped, knowing that the crowd was rapping along with him. By him stopping, you can hear nothing but the crowd and the word nigga laced in it. Did they bleep themselves doing that, or were they singing along? Somehow it was totally okay. There is a massive hypocrisy when the usage of the word, and we need to get away from that. Either everyone ban the word entirely, and or you just have to be intellectually honest about it, and before you throw the word racist behind anyone using it, you need to look and listen to the context. And if you hear the context of how it's being said, you can spot out who's being racist or who's just saying a word to fit in, and or it's just saying a word just because it's been deemed socially acceptable by people of color, whether it be Black and or Latino and or some Hispanic. Because clearly context should matter. If you're just saying the word in a conversation about the hypocrisy of the word, that shouldn't be viewed as racist. In fact, I remember Tupac did an interview with a woman on MTV shortly after being released on bail from prison back in 1996. Tabitha was her name.
You know, they would say things, because they would call you, jail was the first place and I can go, and they just went, well, as soon as I got there, they went, there he goes. And he goes, who? And he goes, there's the rich nigga. I was like, oh, he said nigger. He said nigger. And everybody's looking at me like, so? And I was like, oh my God, this is where I'm gonna be staying? He just said nigger.
Well, you got niggas in one of your records.
Niggas. He's talking about niggers. Niggers was the ones on the rope hanging out the thing. Niggas is the ones with gold ropes hanging out at clubs.
Well, maybe not everyone's aware of the differentiation.
They don't have to be. Everyone, if you're not a nigga and you don't use that word, you don't have to understand. Word. It's just not one of those things.
She said the word, no controversy, and Tupac, one of the realest hardcore thugs out there and son of a Black Panther, you would think if anyone had not so much the right to be offended, but if anyone could spot out racism and or white supremacy or white racist when using the word, it would be Tupac. He didn't get offended. He was more offended at what he was saying the story of the prison guard and what a prison guard said. Then he didn't even bat one eye at Tabitha because he knew the context in which she was repeating the word or saying the word. And if anything, he then just further educated her on the difference between the usage of the word and how it's different, or at least from his perspective, while acknowledging that not all Black people think like him. And if they don't, then they don't have to refer to the word, which, as I recall, Tupac said, as far as he was concerned, the word nigga meant, as an abbreviation, to never ignorant, getting goals accomplished. Niggas are the people you see, successful Black individuals rolling in their Benz and they're supporting gold chains, gold ropes outside the club, chilling and getting their paper on. So we need to have a more honest conversation about the word, not shy away from it, and not be quick to label someone a racist on one hand, despite the fact that they're not using it in any kind of a negative connotation, while all the while giving another group of people total impunity and their immunity for being able to say the word regardless of the context, especially when you hear a lot of diss songs in hip hop where they're clearly using the word in a derogatory, if not evil, mean-spirited manner or in their method. So again, I think the left will be hypocrites in that. Again, they'll be bumping hip hop songs using the word all day long. listening to and not saying a word until it's someone that they disagree with, that they want to falsely label as racist. But again, this is a coordinated attack, all built around attacking freedom of speech, and I firmly support him. Screw The Rock for turning his back on Joe Rogan there. Initially, Dwayne The Rock Johnson showed some solidarity and trying to be the people's champion and saying, you know what, I support Joe Rogan's freedom of discussion and discourse. And then someone mentioned, well, did you hear he used the N-word? Without any context to the quick clip, Dwayne The Rock Johnson then backpedaled. Screw you. Thankfully, the CEO of Spotify is still refusing to bow down, although the CEO did come out recently and apologize to his staff for those words, even though those were used years ago, which before he was ever on that platform. He still apologized, but is not terminating his relationship. So still a win for freedom of speech. And even if you were initially upset with, if you're not one of those people, I know Jay-Z and Oprah had a big discussion, for instance, over the use of the word. And you can see that there is legitimately, I think, a big generational disagreement in terms of the use of the word, whereas if you're a boomer like Oprah, you have a much different view of whatever iteration of the word it is, and you're not going to like it no matter what, with the exception of the Richard Pryors of that same generation who actually popularized its colloquialism and or usage amongst Black people and or in pop culture, whereas Gen X, millennials, and Zoomers have a much different experience with the word and or understanding of the word, especially given the difference in terms of the conditions in which they grew up in society and how that word has been used and or at least mostly accepted in the Gen X, millennial, and Zoomer generation versus the racism blatantly used against baby boomers. So there's that generational divide and a gap on it. And if you're one of those who just hate the word regardless, and I believe actress Tempest Bledsoe from The Cosby, I remember she was on Real Time with Bill Maher like 20 years ago, and she was actually vehemently against anyone who uses the word as well, much like Oprah. There are a lot of people like that exist, but you know what? Joe Rogan came out and apologized for anyone who was offended by that. He even admitted, you know what, that was so many years ago, over the course of 12 years of doing the podcast, but many, many, many years ago, he has since changed his perspective on the usage of the word and or the term, and hasn't used it in years because now he agrees, but that happened years ago. You can't apologize but so much for who you were in the past. I'm not with Joe Rogan apologizing to the mob any more than Dwayne The Rock Johnson, because you can never apologize to them. It's never going to be enough. They want either full submission and compliance or blood. Screw you, The Rock, for bowing to social pressure and trying to be too many things to too many people. You just need to stand your ground and hold your ground. And now he's receiving backlash from the other side because of, all right, you're going to come at Joe Rogan. We have plenty of clips of you being derogatory and or if not stereotypical or proclaiming a stereotype of Chinese individuals during your time as The Rock back in the WWF, now WWE. Now, again, we can all recognize that was satire. That was for entertainment, not malicious or harm or true racist intent, just trying to be funny. But he's going to receive that backlash. As far as the Planet of the Apes comment, not a best look, but then I have to remember, again, this was not Joe Rogan saying something in what he believed to be the privacy of his own little conversation amongst a clique and exposing the true racist terms. He said this, again, in a public format and or public platform on his podcast. He is a comedian meant for shock value. He was doing it for comedic purposes. Even I can recognize that. It's not the best of look, but he was trying to be funny. I mean, I'm also old enough to remember a biopic movie called Lean On Me, starring Morgan Freeman, among other prominent Black actors and actresses. It was kind of like a biopic of actual events of a principal named Joe Clark and reforming a school named Eastside High, which was promising back in the 60s. And then upon Joe Clark's exit of the school, it declined into what was like a glorified juvenile prison. And then in one of the opening scenes or opening acts, when there's a massive brawl in the cafeteria, which was again tantamount to a jail yard fight, Guns N' Roses song Welcome to the Jungle came on. I wasn't offended by that. Neither was Morgan Freeman or any of the other black actors or actresses by the actual inclusion of that song to describe those black high school students and or the situation, because it was a jungle there. But again, sticks and stones, whatever happened to that phrase. But again, Joe Rogan still apologized. I don't think he should have, but he did. And you should have just accept the apology for mistakes are made that he did in the past. But that's my video, wanting to support, again, freedom of speech and Joe Rogan. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your subscriptions do go a long way with allowing me to continue to put out content. Don't forget to smash on that notification bell to get notified of my latest content or material. This is Bruce the Boss, and I'm out. Peace.